So the mastery, of course, is to remember to use your tools when you need them, right? So we were talking about, okay, how do we connect into our spirit guides? What is the first song that pops into your mind? That will be a message. We talked about, I allow for my essence to enter my body now. Stop, slow down, and allow for the shift. Sometimes you're very caught up in like 3D mind, in the thinking mind, in the ego mind, and it's almost like you don't want to switch over. Like you want to be a little mad, or you want to be a little this, or a little sad, or you want to be, and that's okay for a moment, but it's easier if we kind of change the channel if you want that. And also practicing changing the channel so it becomes more of a habitual practice, so it doesn't have to be like such a big ordeal and then you have to change it. So work with these things as you go about. Okay, so I had a whole geek out and like spend like 2 days on dimensions. So I'm going to give you a little taster of it. And what I was thinking about is like, okay, so we're going into 5th dimension. Well, what the heck does that actually mean? So I wanted to go through what does it feel like, and what are dimensions? There are vibrations, there are tones, right? So now when we're talking of getting message from our spirit guide from a song, we're all smiling. So immediately we're up at a higher, more light energy. So the first 3 dimensions, the first dimension is like a dot or a straight line, right? So that's just one dimension. To get into the second dimension from that, you have a perpendicular line that crosses it. Okay, then you're in a 2 dimension, like on a paper, right? So you can also take the first dimension and bend it, and it will become the second dimension. Okay, the second dimension is like a picture, and if you bend the second dimension, it becomes a figure. We have depth and length and that whole bit, right? So that's the third dimension. Okay, we are living in the third dimension. So we are feeling ourselves like we can see ourselves, in a 3-dimensional space. Okay, what then happens when we go into the 4th dimension? Okay, so if you take us and we bend ourselves one more time, right? So the 4th dimension is the astral dimension where we kind of come and go in and out of, right? This is where it's kind of like where we can practice an alchemical secret, according to Rudolf Steiner. And I will read here a little bit from my paper. So the 4th dimension is where we start to engage in imagination. Okay, so we're going beyond just the facts. We are employing a little more of the divine and sacred feminine that can imagine and create. Okay, here we are starting to be able to initiate a little bit more of a deeper understanding. Now, Rudolf Steiner was teaching this like before they have computer animation. This was written about 100 years ago, right? So what they did when they were going into they had the first, the second, and the third dimension. When they were going into the 4th dimension, they said, okay, well, what if we add colors to the side of a cube, for example? How can we then get the 4th dimension to interface with the other cube? So you're kind of starting to mix dimensions, right? So what they said, if you were an alchemist, think of yourself in the 1800s with a cap on and with your experiments, you know. Dwell first deeply in to the perception of water. Okay, so let's just, without just using only imagination, just imagine yourself. They had to study water. How does it feel to become one with the stream? Okay, how does it feel to allow for your essence to enter your body? It's like almost like your primordial water, like your soul self is of this essence where we can not quite grasp it, but we know what it is. So in the back in the day, they started to become very aware of what is water. Okay, how does it feel to touch warm water, cold water, ice? What if you look in the sky and you feel rain? You can just see, wow, it's very elusive. It can change forms. And where does the clouds go, for example, when they blow away? Like this, things are changing and moving, okay? So hanging here. Then they were talking about, what about light? Okay, what is light? How do we feel light? Okay, we have the sun that gives us light. We have our lights all around us. Those are external lights. Okay, but also as we come together here more and more, as we are lifting our vibration up, we were more light-hearted when we were asking our spirit guides or our soul self to show us a song. We're all smiling, right? Because we got a message and we'd love to share that message. So what happened, it was that we started to ignite our own inner light. Okay? Then, so we have water, we're aware of water, we're asking our essence to enter and trickle in like water. And then we can mimic, we know how the sun looks and feel and how it brings us so much life. And now we can think about how we were asking our soul self and we became lighter within. Okay, so it's a little slippery, but I think you get the idea of it. And what is the nature of light? Okay, what can we do to create inner light? How do we light up from within? Now, when the light is reflecting on you, remember, imagine yourself feeling the sunlight hitting your back. How warm and wonderful that feels. Now you can use this to kind of flip the image and imagine that your light is reaching up to the sun and make a connection. So you kind of flip it, right? And let's do that for a moment. We can use a beautiful full moon light. You can use your candle light. So as you know, envision and feel a light that you like that's somewhat natural, the candle or the sun or the moon, shining onto you. And you're receiving this energy, the light, the waves, the warmth, the light-heartedness. Now imagine that light within you, and you can take that light and shine it back up to the moon, shine the light back to the sun, shine your light back into the candle. And you can maybe see that the light within you is then It becomes warmer. It becomes part of who you are. Okay. And so it's kind of like a counter image of the outer light creates the inner light. Okay. And now, in order to understand the astral world or the fourth dimension, Rudolf Steiner says, imagine now the water fully permeated by light. Then they said that that created mercury. But it's not the mercury that is in the physical essence, but it's almost like a shimmering light of the mercury. Okay, like a moonlight, like a shimmering, sparkling, lighter essence, a light imbued with water. Doesn't that sound almost like your soul self? Imagine, how they weigh people after they pass, and then when the soul leaves the body, it's like a third of a gram or something less in the weight. So that's the substance of that. And sometimes they also talked about the fire air. That's a different way of looking at it, which is the light in our heart, our yoti, our spiritual light. It's like a fire light inside of our heart. Okay. That luminous energy that is inside of our heart is air plus warmth plus fire, and this we can generate by ourselves by uplifting ourselves. So, and they call this the luminous fire air, and that's more of a sulfur energy. When I think about sulfur, I think about, it smells so bad, but think now about how they are just little bit of a quick education here. It's very esoteric. So just grasp it. You don't have to understand anything. We're just washing these ideas over us. So we're just grasping a little bit here. So the astral waters are built out of 4 forces, he continues to explain. And it's water, air, light, and fire. These are the 4 dimensions of the astral space. Okay, so this is very subjective elements, and it's symbolic in the 4th dimension and up. So in order to understand or feel or resonate with the 4th dimension, that was very physical explanation. Now we're going to go more into a different understanding. And we have to lift ourselves up spiritually to be able to be interested and grasp this idea of the 4th dimension. And what the 4th dimension, so now he's explaining, think about a cube, and then think about the space around the cube. Okay, so the space around the cube is positive, and then we call the cube as a negative because it's heavier than the space around it. Okay, and it's not like it's a bad cube or anything, but we're just like comparing the space. So if the cube is like a body, a physical body, then we are heavier than the space around it, but we are not separate from the space around it. Okay, so it's kind of like the mist, the energy around us exists at all times, and it has to do with time. Why? Because when we have a physical body, we're appearing more dense, right? But the body itself, okay, so this is a little, we have to think kind of a little bit backwards here. It's type of a bending of the space. So we were talking about in the beginning, if you have 1 dimension, it's flat. If you bend the 1 dimension, it becomes 2 dimensions. And then the picture on the wall, we bend that, it becomes a three-dimensional space, right? And if we bend the three-dimensional space, if we bend ourselves, it becomes fourth dimension. And it's hard to imagine that we're bending ourselves, but we can use our consciousness to go deeper into that. So now he's comparing the cube and our physical body. Okay, if we come from our soul self and we're coming into a physical body, we're coming kind of from what he would call the death into the body, and then the body would be a heavier and negative space. We're densifying ourselves, we're contracting ourselves into a body than the soul self around us. Okay, so when we come into a body, it feels like we're going from the dead to the living. But the death for the human consciousness is like bending the 3D picture into the 4D. So finally, the consciousness can come into the body, and we're bending it, the human consciousness, bending the 3D into the 4D. Okay, it doesn't really matter. But for the physical body, then the death of our body is then moving from 4D into 3D. Okay, so we're changing dimensions. Okay, so where is he going with this? Well, in order to understand, because it seems like it's backwards, but we are 3D bodies. When we're dying, I think we will look more like a 4D, right? But what he's talking about here is also talking about, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Plato's cave, how these guys were locked in a cave, and then they were seeing shadows walking back and forth, right? And then I said, well, there must be something alive because we can see the shadows moving, but it looks flat, but they can't be flat because they are moving, right? So then Plato, according to Rudolf Steiner, was then correct, because with time, when they were moving in time, there's motion. So the 4D, we are already in 4D, but in order to experience 3D, we have to have 4D. Okay, so our consciousness is outside our body, in a sense. So in order then to be in 5D, right, we have to understand that the consciousness, if the consciousness is outside the body, and then we say, I would like to bring my essence into my body now, you can feel it entering. It means that we are 3D, but we have to be 4D in order to be aware of the 3D. So it's actually, we're going from the higher to the lower in dimension, right? So the movement has to do with time. So the fourth dimension has to do with time, space itself, okay? So we must investigate. Okay, so we're gonna make this a little easier. So then if we can be becoming aware that the time is a projection from the 4D into the 3D, because when we come into the body, we can experience time in the physical body. Then there's an aliveness. There's an organic understanding that is determined by the fourth dimension. Okay, now the fifth dimension, now we have a new angle. So remember, the first angles, they are perpendicular to each other, 1, 2, and 3. But then when we go into the fourth, we're bending time in a different way. So that's why we can't see it. It's a little bit around the corner. We can't quite see it. Remember how I said, oh, it's like the time has an angle, but we can't really understand it, right? Unless we go up higher and look down. Okay, so when we go into the fifth dimension, where we have a new line of accumulation of two currents of forces which accumulate at one point, only by experiencing the point, we then have the new dimension. And the point is the 0 point. So instead of going out, we go in for the fifth dimension. Okay, so fifth dimension is the absolute stillness, where we can go beyond time and space. Okay, so we're becoming more shimmering, more light. Okay, so the dimension as a polar stream of forces with itself, so that it has a positive and negative dimension component, and then it's a neutralization of those two that will create the fifth dimension. So think, if we have negative and positive coming together and then they can't move, then we go through that stillness and we come out. That's the fifth dimension. Remember, fifth dimension is unity, consciousness, and love. So that means that if we have to be feeling and having compassion for both the negative and the positive until they're balanced. And when they're balanced, then we're at the 0 point, then we go through and we are in the fifth dimension. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that we have to understand compassion for our past times, our future times, all of our lifetimes, past, present, future, parallel lives, which gives us a tremendous understanding that if something is positive and is happening for us, through us, we observe it. But then if we have something negative, how can we love compassionately the negative experience to counterbalance it so it becomes neutral? And in the neutral space, we can then go through. Okay, it's a little esoteric. I know I get all hung up on these things, and I will give you the article so you can read it if you want to dig deeper in this. So the key for the fifth dimension is compassion. We have compassion for the dark because it can't see the light. We have compassion for the light because it shows us where there needs to be, where there is darkness, right? So it is this balance. So in our experience, we're allowing for an very refined awareness of, where am I judging? Where am I getting caught up? And then go back in, bring in your essence, get into the stillness, and then see, is there somewhere where I can bring in more compassion or divine sacred feminine in to balance out the doing, the stress, the judging, the greed, or whatever it is that we're observing and seeing. So and as we neutralize it through us, it spreads out all around the world. And then the sixth dimension has to do with, because you can imagine that picture is like this, because now we're adding so much that it's really esoteric to even see a dimension that is like that. Actually, a cube ends up looking like a flower, like a mandala. That's the sixth dimension. But what we then have in the sixth dimension is a deeper development as an expression of the sixth dimension of being self-aware and self-conscious. So if we're in the fifth dimension of compassion, in order to be compassionate, we have to be in the sixth dimension and be interested and have this self-awareness that I can create more compassion. So do you see how it works backwards? Okay, I hope you guys somewhat caught that and understood that. So we're going from our 3D dimension where we're becoming aware, right? We're aware of past and future. We're aware of positive, we're aware of negative, and we're neutralizing by finding it interesting and doing these meetings and thinking, wow, what does it take for me to go through the next threshold to become aware of this next dimension, right? So when we're in the 6th dimension, we're totally aware of what's going on around us. We still have a body because remember, we're multidimensional. And so it's just this expansive consciousness. And what is it that we're doing about things? Can we go back into the center of our heart and contemplate? Can we take that moment to stop and just a little by little, gently kind of comb out those hooks that brings us into the polarity again? Okay, so let this just settle within you and think about times when you really were self-aware, that you were aware of the time. Was the time kind of like floating? Okay. What were you feeling compassion for everyone? You were like in love with everything and the trees and the flowers, and you understood. Okay, so learning to just stretch the consciousness and playing around with these ideas of dimensionality, and we're always sliding in and out of them. And then you wonder, what about the 6 other dimensions? Well, there are, just like the cube, if the cube was heavier as a 3 dimension, the 4 dimension was caving in to that cube. Now, when you go from dimension 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, they're the polar opposite of the first 6 dimensions. So we're just going deeper and deeper, deeper in to the heart, basically. So we're going in and then out into the universe. All right. So let's pause here for a second. Learned all. Okay. So we have some sense of the dimensions now for you guys that are listening to the recording. Yeah, we're talking about understanding how it is when we're emptying our brains and opening our hearts and letting our guidance come through. We're supposed to channel all the time, right? When we try to figure things out with our mind, then it's time to take that moment and allow for the essence to come back in and reset. And can you feel how that releases tension in our bodies and stress, aches and pains? Because then we don't have to hold on, or the body doesn't have to hold on. So the nervous system lets go as well. And as I see the little kitty cat back there, Cricket on Kimberly Ann's sofa. So remember, in Egypt, how they had like this ibis head on a human body, that had like a bull's head, and on, they were having animals on the physical head to show that the animals, the instinct and the emotions of the animals are natural. Okay, remember we say rim, 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 we return to the wisdom of the natural wisdom of whatever it is, of the negative emotion we're letting go of. We're coming back into the natural wisdom. They were actually seeing humans as lesser than certain of the animals, because the animals are living in the rhythm of the netaru, the natural rhythms and flow of the energies of nature. Okay, because they don't have a conscious ego mind that can calculate and educate and resonate or reason, right? So, but the animals always resonating, they're feeling. If they get angry, they get angry, and then it's out, and not a big deal. They don't hesitate to eat a cricket. They'll just eat it. Oh, hi, puppy. Oh, my goodness. Hello, handsome. Hello. What a baby. So the animals were cherished for that because they were tapped in to the natural rhythms, whereas the humans were very logical and trying to figure everything out. But now that we're coming back in the procession of time, we have so much logic, and we're starting to welcome these natural rhythms. We'll be starting to understand energy in a whole new way, right? So the Egyptians, they were celebrating the natural brilliance of being tuned in and tapped in to the rhythm and the vibration and the tempo of the earth, of the water, of the thunder, of the elements, right? Earth, water, fire, air, and space. And they could put then the logic to decide and just trust, like the animals did. So they thought in Egypt that the animals had certain aspects that were higher spiritually, or like naturally, natural wisdomly, than sometimes we used to be when we're too much in the planning or in the thinking mind. So just think about that. Like, what are the natural rhythms that you can balance out within yourself? What can you learn from the sweetness of your pets? What can you learn from the cycles of the year? Remember the schedule, the clock is man-made, and does it bring us infinite wisdom? And does it bring us, yeah, it's good if you're going to meet somebody on the right day, right time, but really consider, when are you losing your internal wisdom just to get things through? Can you balance both? Can you allow for your essence to enter and work in your life in this way, where you're using the rhythms of the day, of the time, of the spring, of the fall, using the waves of the full moon, and going out and see and put your feet on the ground and see what you get. Can we incorporate this to awaken ourselves so that we can live in higher dimensions and come up with new solutions, new medicine, new healing techniques, new recharging? So share with me a little bit, like, if you would have the strength of a bull, or have the wisdom of being able to fly, what are the aspects or the forces that you can bring into you? So let's think about that a little bit.